Hello everyone and welcome back to The Lost Planeswalker. You're here with me, Jesse, The Lost Planeswalker, and today I'm going to build a dragon deck. The Dragon is getting a reprint in Commander Masters, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to try my hand at building a deck. I have a friend who plays the Dragon. I know how incredibly strong it can be, so I tried to put cards in here to take advantage of its great power. I have flavorfully named this the is Gurd. Now this is a really expensive deck, and if you want to check it out, I'm going to have it linked in the description, and it's on Archdeck. It's my favorite deck building website. So the Dragon reads 4 white, blue, black, red, green. Legendary creature, dragon, avatar. Eminence. As long as the Dragon is in the command zone or on the battlefield, other dragons you cast cost 1 less to cast. It has flying, and whenever one or more dragons you control attack, draw that many cards. Then you may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. The Dragon is kind of everything you want in a dragon commander package. Maybe without haste, but cheapens all of your dragon spells, and then it makes it so you draw a bunch of cards, which is kind of one of the downfalls of dragon decks, is either everything's too expensive or you run out of card draw. So this fixes both. There's no wonder this is the most popular dragon commander out there. So starting off, let's break down some of the lands. I'm not going to go super heavy into what I would pick, just because there's a lot of diverse lands, that can really change the value of this deck. You can go for the really expensive lands because you're playing all 5 colors, or you can go for a lot of tap lands, but core staples, we obviously have Commander Tower, Exotic Orchard, Haven of the Spirit Dragon, and Path of Ancestry. All of these cards are going to help us get our colors we need and cast more dragon spells. And like I said earlier, the forests, islands, mountains, plains, swamps, whatever you want to do there is really up to you. There's a lot of dual lands you're going to want to include. Now, whether or not you're picking up more expensive, shock lands, or the Midnight Hunt lands that enter the battlefield untapped if you control 2 or more lands, that's all up to you. But to help us also mana fix, let's look at our mana rocks in this deck. So the way I decided to go around mana rocks was look at what colors we have most of and try and put that in here. So starting off, we have Arcane Signet, Boros Signet, and Chromatic Lantern. Arcane Signet is just one of those cards you have to include. It's gonna, make sure that we can get every color we need. Boros Signet adds a red and a white, so that's really great. And Chromatic Lantern taps to add any one color, but it also makes it so all of our lands tap to add any color. This is one of the decks that I think Chromatic Lantern works the best in, and that's just because you can tap for every color you need. And a lot of decks that play this probably don't need it, but any 5-color deck I think probably should include one. Next we have Commander Sphere, Rule Signet, Is It Signet? Again, Commander Sphere is going to get us whatever color we need, and you can sack it to draw a card maybe in the late game. Rule Signet is a red and a green, which is great, and Is It is blue and a red. So there we go. Our next 3 are Orb of Dragonkind, Rakdos Signet, and Simic Signet. The Orb of Dragonkind is really unique because we can tap 1 to add 2 colors on any mana combination we need to cast dragon spells. In addition, we can pay a red, sack it, look at the top 7 cards of our library, and reveal a dragon from them and put it into your hand. So if we're really in the late game and we really need to get that dragon, maybe it's a Tiamat to get more into our hand or just another dragon to put on the board to stay alive, sacking this could be the difference between living and dying. Next we have Rakdos Signet. This taps for a black and a red, and Simic Signet, green and a blue. We have a lot of green and blue cards in here, so I just want to make sure that we could cast those when we need to. And of course, no one can forget Soul Ring, especially with our commander costing 10 mana. Soul Ring is definitely great in this deck. There's a lot of decks where Soul Ring is obviously wonderful, but in this deck we have so many high cost spells, it's going to be used so much more in this deck than I think a lot of others. Now let's move straight into dragons. Obviously, the most important part of this deck is dragons, and I've decided to add 19 of them. We have a lot of things that are going to help us draw dragons in our deck, so I think this is a good number. So starting off, I have all of the ancient dragons from the Commander Battle for Baldur's Gate set. We have Ancient Brass, Ancient Bronze, Ancient Copper, Ancient Gold, and Ancient Silver. I think that these are some of the coolest dragons to have, and just flavorfully, whenever you deal combat damage, you get something great. Ancient Brass Dragon allows you to get creatures back from graveyards, which is great. Ancient Bronze Dragon puts +1/+1 counters on creatures. Ancient Copper gives you treasure tokens. Ancient Gold makes a lot of Fairy Dragon creature tokens. And Ancient Silver will draw you a ton of cards. Next, we have Atarka World Render, Dragonborn Champion, and Dromoka the Eternal. Atarka World Render gives dragons we control double strike. Dragon Lord Champion helps us draw cards whenever we deal 5 or more damage to a player. And Dromoka the Eternal has Bolster. So whenever a dragon we control attacks, we bolster 2. choosing a creature with the least toughness among creature we control and put 2+1/+1 counters on it. We have a lot of small utility creatures we're going to want to protect, but if this is all we have and a couple other dragons, we can just continue to buff our dragons with more bolster triggers, so this is also really great. Next we have Goldspan Dragon, Hellkite Corsair, and Clouth, Unrivaled Ancient. Goldspan Dragon is going to help us get treasure, and then those treasures can tap to add mana, and it doubles the amount of mana we get from them, which is really good. Hellkite Corsair puts our commander onto the battlefield, and it gains haste, so we can attack with it the same turn we play Hellkite Corsair, and we'll get that trigger off of itself being able to draw a bunch of cards and place more permanents onto the board. Clouth Unrivaled Ancient is a really unique card, especially because of how expensive the cards in our deck are, because whenever it attacks, we're going to add X mana in any combination of colors, where X is the total power of attacking creatures. Spend this only to cast spells, and we don't lose it as steps and phases end, meaning that we're going to get a ton of mana swing with all our dragons, and we can play all of our big spells that we're going to get into later, or other giant dragons. So Clouth is a really, really cool card. Next up, we have Coalesce Scale Singer, Lathis Dragon Queen, and Miram Sentinel Worm. Coalesce Scale Singer is going to let us look at the top card of our library, and we can cast dragon spells off the top, which is a really, really great ability. Lathis is going to make dragons whenever a non-token dragon enters the battlefield, which is really great, and we can also buff all of our dragons using her second ability. And Miram Sentinel Worm might rival the Dragon in sheer power, and having this in our deck is going to mean that all the dragon spells we get to play are just going to be that much more powerful. Whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, create a token that's a copy of it, except the token isn't legendary if that dragon is legendary. All the dragons we already talked about, while not all of them are legendary, a lot of them are, and we're going to be able to create doubles of them regardless if they're legendary or not. Miram is a very scary card, and if you see this come out in any dragon deck, you have to remove it immediately. Next up, we have Rith Liberated Primeval, Terror of the Peaks, and Tiamat. Rith gives other dragons Ward 2, which is super great for protection. And because our dragons are big, our opponents are going to want to protect their stuff. And if we deal excess damage, we get to create red dragon creature tokens with his second ability. Terror of the Peaks is a game ender in this deck. Terror of the Peaks is so good, and it's really good in all kinds of decks, and it doesn't have to be dragons, but it works even better in dragon. Whenever they target Terror of the Peaks, our opponents are going to lose life, and whenever another creature enters a battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. This will end up dealing massive damage as our dragons enter the battlefield and can remove our opponent's creatures or just deal damage directly to their face. And Tiamat, a god dragon from the original D&D set, is so cool because when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, search for up to 5 dragons not named Tiamat. Each of them have a different name, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle. If this is later in the game, we can play her to get a bunch of dragons into our hand, and then pretty much be unstoppable from there if we can cast them. And lastly, the 2 dragons we have is Two-Headed Hellkite and Utvara Hellkite. Two-Headed Hellkite has Flying Menace and Haste, and whenever it attacks, you draw 2 cards, which is just amazing. And Utvara Hellkite creates a 6/6 red dragon creature token whenever a dragon we control attacks. So if we attack with 1 dragon, we get a 6/6. If we attack with 2 dragons, we get 2 6/6s, and so on. And this is just a incredibly good card. There's a reason it's 8 mana, is it just gets out of control very quickly, and if you pair that with Terror of the Peaks, it's just game over for any opponent. Now, we've looked at a lot of the dragon spells, and they're all very, very expensive. So our next category is going to look at discounting those dragon spells, and there's quite a bit of ways to do that. The easiest and most effective ways I have included in the deck start off with Dragon Lord Servant, Dragon Speaker Shaman, and Herald's Horn. These first 2 discount our dragons by 1 and 2, so we can discount our dragons up to 3 mana right there, which is very, very powerful. These are some of my favorite cards to play to discount dragons, and they're very fun. Next, Herald's Horn is a very cool artifact. We can choose a creature type, which is dragons. We discount those spells by 1, and then at the beginning of our upkeep, we get to look at the top of our library. If it's a creature of the chosen, we can reveal it, and if we do, we put it into our hand, and then we draw another card. Next up, we have Nogi Draco Zealot, Sarkhan Soul of Flame, and Shadow in the Warp. Nogi Draco Zealot discounts our dragons by 1, and if we control 3 or more dragons, he himself turns into a dragon until end of turn, which is super cool. Similarly, Sarkhan Souls of Flame discounts dragons by 1, and whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under our control, we can have Sarkhan Soul of Flame become a copy of it until end of turn, except its name is Sarkhan Soul of Flame, and it's legendary in addition to its other types. If we end up playing this, we can play the Dragon. It becomes a copy of the Dragon, and we'll get double triggers that turn, which is just super, super good. And Shadow in the Warp discounts our first creature spell each turn by 2, which is really great because we're probably not casting more than 1 dragon spell a turn. And whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, it deals 2 damage to them. A little bit of damage here, but also discounting our first spell by 2 is just perfect. And the most powerful discount we have is Urza's Incubator. As it enters the battlefield, we choose a creature type, dragon, and creatures of the chosen type cost 2 less to cast. This is just a great card. It's going to make casting all of our dragons so much easier, and if you can get 2, even 3 of these out there, you're going to have no problem casting all the dragons you want. To help getting to casting our dragons faster, we also have Mana Dorks. These are mostly low-cost spells that are going to help us get a ton of mana onto the battlefield to help cast more spells with. First off, we have Bird's Paradise, Bloom, Tender, and Cultivate. Bird's Paradise is a format staple. We can add 1 mana of any color. Bloom Tender is a very unique mana adder because we have so many dragons that are multiple colors. For each color among permanents you control, add 1 mana of that color. We're going to be able to get all those colors we need, and Cultivates can help us get some lands in our hand and on the battlefield. Next up, we have Delighted Halfling, Frontier Siege, and Gwenna, Eyes of Gaia. Delighted Halfling is a new card from the Lord of the Rings set that adds a colorless or adds 1 mana of any color, and we can only spend this on legendary spells, but most of our creatures are legendary, so that'll be great. Frontier Siege enters the battlefield, we choose dragons or cons. You'll see a lot of these other siege cards throughout this deck review because I really liked them and they're really flavorful, so I made sure to add them all. If we choose cons at the beginning of each of your main phases, which is your first and second main phase, you add 2 green mana, which is very, very good. And if we choose dragons, whenever a creature with flying enters the battlefield under your control, you may have it fight a target creature you don't control. This is a May ability, so we don't have to, but this would be a really great way to get rid of our opponent's really good value creatures very easily. And Gwenna, Eyes of Gaia, taps to add 2 mana in any combination of colors, and we can only use this to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. And whenever you cast a creature spell with power 5 or greater, put a +1/+1 counter on Gwenna, Eyes of Gaia and untap it, meaning that we can do it again and again in the same turn. The last 3 we have is Kodama's Reach, Riz of the Claw, and Sarkhan's Fireblood. Kodama's Reach is exactly the same as Cultivate. We get to search for lands, put 1 in our hand, 1 on the battlefield. Riz of the Claw lets us add 2 mana of any color of combinations to cast dragon spells. Once per turn, we may cast dragon spells from our graveyard, which is going to be super great as we get later in the game. And whenever a dragon creature spell is cast from the graveyard, it gains exile this card if it dies. So they'll go away, but we still have a way to get things back, which gives us a lot of versatility later in the game. And finally, Sarkhan Fireblood lets us +1 to discard a card and draw a card, +1 to add 2 mana of any combination of colors and spend this mana to cast dragon spells, and -7, create 4/5/5 red dragon creature tokens with flying. We're probably not going to get that last ability, but being able to draw cards and discard cards when we need to, and also get 2 mana to spend on dragons is going to be huge. In addition to playing a 5-color deck, you get access to all the best card draw spells. This includes tutors and any way we can basically just get more cards into our hand. So starting off, we have Eldamri's Call, Garruk's Uprising, and Kindred Discovery. Eldamri's Call lets us search a library for a creature card. We reveal it, put it into our hand, and then shuffle our library. Garruk's Uprising, when it enters the battlefield, if we control a creature with power 4 or greater, we have to draw a card. Creatures we control have trample, which is going to be huge in our dragon deck. And whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield, we get to draw a card. And Kindred Discovery lets us choose a creature type as it enters the battlefield, and whenever a creature you control of the chosen type enters or attacks, draw a card. This is going to help us out, so if we don't have anything to do in our first main phase, maybe we don't have any dragons, well, if we attack with a couple, then we can draw some more cards and hopefully get into one. Next up, we have Last March of the Ents, Return of the Wild Speaker, and Sarkhan's Triumph. Last March of the Ents is a really, really powerful card because first off, this spell can't be countered. We draw cards equal to the greatest toughness among creatures you control and put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. This means we are going to draw 10 cards if your dragon is out there, and then any number of cards in our hand that are dragons, well, go straight onto the battlefield, which pairs perfectly with Return of the Wild Speaker because we get to draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control. So if you have the Dragon out again, you get to draw 10 cards, then pair it with Last March of the Ents is another 10, plus you get to put everything onto the battlefield. And Sarkhan's Triumph works exactly the same as Eldamri's Call. We search our library for a dragon, reveal it, put it in our hand, then shuffle. This one is just specific to dragons though, which is very good in our deck, but I don't expect red to do anything more than that. And lastly, our last draw spell in this deck is the One Ring. 4 mana, indestructible. When it enters battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn, which can be used defensively in the late game. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each bird encounter on the One Ring. And you can tap it to put a bird encounter on the One Ring and then draw a card for each bird encounter on it. This is going to be a great way for us to draw into those remaining spells, utility stuff, whatever we need to close out the game. And our last category here is just utility cards, creatures, whatever, that really didn't fit anywhere else, but just finish up this deck real nicely and make it as powerful as it can be. Starting off, we have Citadel Siege, Crucible of Fire, and Crux of Fate. Citadel Siege has, as it enters the battlefield, choose Khans or Dragons. If it's Khans at the beginning of your combat on your turn, put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, or Dragons at the beginning of combat on your turn, tap a target creature an opponent controls. Both those super powerful. Crucible of Fire for 4 mana gives all dragons we control +3/+3. If our dragons weren't already big enough, this makes them an even more of a threat. And Crux of Fate has choose one, destroy all dragons or destroy all non-dragon creatures. Crux of Fate is really just a game ender, especially if nobody can counter it. You cast Crux of Fate, destroy all non-dragons, and then just swing in for the win. Moving on, we have Dragon Master Outcast, Outpost Siege, and Palace Siege. Dragon Master Outcast is one of my favorite cards because for 1 mana, you get a creature human shaman. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 6 or more lands, create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying. This isn't dependent on us casting any dragons, so if we're having trouble, that's not a problem. It's just getting those lands that we need, so this is a really, really cool card. Outpost Siege has, when it enters, choose Khans or Dragons. Khans, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play it. And Dragons, whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to any target. More or less, you'll probably be using the Khans part of this card, just because you want that impulsive card draw, but the second part isn't bad either. And Palace Siege is another siege, so choose Khans or Dragons when it enters. Khan, at the beginning of your upkeep, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, or Dragons, at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2. Again, both of those are pretty good in whatever scenario you find yourself in the game, so definitely worth playing. Next up, we have Realmwalker, Rhythm of the Wild, and Spitflame. Realmwalker is a changeling, so technically it is a dragon, but as it enters, choose a creature type, which we will pick dragons. We can look at the top card of our library anytime, and we may cast creature spells from the chosen type from the top of our library. Rhythm of the Wild makes it so our spells can't be countered, which is great, and it gives our non-token creatures Riot, meaning they either get a +1/+1 or haste, which is just fantastic in our dragon deck. And Spitflame deals 4 damage to target creature, and whenever a dragon enters a battlefield under your control, you may pay a red. If you do, return it from your graveyard to your hand. While this isn't the most cost-effective spell because we're going to be creating so many dragons, and it doesn't have the non-token phrase in there, whenever we just create a token, we can get it back. So this can be used very effectively later in the game to help remove multiple things over and over again. Next up, we have Sylvia Brightspear, Tagama Ogentai Master, and Temur Ascendancy. Sylvia Brightspear is a partner card, but we're not putting the partner in there, but it gives double strike to all of our dragons, which is just so good. Our dragons are already big, this is just even better. Tagami Ogentai Master gives instant sorceries and dragon spells, can't be countered by spells or abilities, and whenever we cast an instant or sorcery from our hand, if it attacked this turn, that spell gains rebound, meaning we exile the spell as it resolves, and at the beginning of our next upkeep, we can cast it without paying its mana cost, which is really great because we have some really cool instant sorcery spells in this deck. And Temur Ascendancy gives all of our creatures haste, which is super good, and whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under our control, we may draw a card, which basically all of our dragons are, so we're going to be drawing a bunch of cards off of this. And the last card we have for this, the is Gurd commander deck, is There and Back Again. This is also a new card from the Lord of the Rings, and it is an enchantment saga. Up to 1 target creature can't block for as long as you control There and Back Again. and then the ring tempts you. We will search our library for a mountain card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. And number 3 is create Smog, a legendary 6/6 red dragon creature token with flying, haste, and whenever this creature dies, create 14 treasure tokens. We have so much ramp in this deck that we can get this out very, very early. And by the time we have our Dragon, we'll have a Smog. We can attack, draw cards. If Smog dies, be able to play those cards because we're getting 14 treasure tokens. So this is just a wonderful, wonderful card. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked my deck build of the Dragon. And if you did, please consider subscribing to my channel. I try to put out at least one Commander deck tech a week. This is something I really enjoy doing. And the Dragon is coming back, and he's going to be the cheapest he's been since he was first printed in 2014 or 17, whenever he came out. The Dragon is one of the most powerful dragons, if not the most powerful dragon out there, and it is just so much fun to watch people play it. I'm not a particular fan of getting it played against me because he's so strong, but I hope you enjoy, and I hope you learned a thing or two. If there's a dragon you think I should have included in this and didn't, please leave it in the comments down below. You know, I tried to pick out the best ones, but I know there's a lot of good dragons I didn't get to include. And if you like, just simply please leave me a like. I would really appreciate that. It would help this video get out to more people and just make my day. So that's it. And as always, I'll see you later, Planeswalkers.